She was my neighbor's sister, beautiful, untouchable, until the night she whispered, "Don't call me older, call me yours." I never planned on meeting her that day. I had only gone next door to return a borrowed book, expecting a quick exchange with my neighbor. Instead, when the door opened, it wasn't him standing there, it was his sister. For a second, I almost forgot why I was there. She looked at me with a calm steadiness, the kind of gaze that makes you feel seen without trying. She must have been in her early 40s, though the number felt meaningless when matched against the elegance she carried. There was something about her posture, the easy grace in the way she leaned against the doorway, that made my words catch in my throat. "Come in," she said softly, stepping aside. Her voice was warm but measured, like she was used to holding the world at just enough distance. The living room smelled faintly of jasmine and freshly brewed tea. The curtains were half drawn, letting sunlight scatter across the floorboards in golden streaks. Everything about the space felt lived in yet quietly refined, like her. She moved toward the kitchen, her steps unhurried. "Tea?" she asked, already reaching for an extra cup. I nodded, though I didn't even like tea much. At that moment, it wasn't about the drink, it was about the invitation. I sat at the small wooden table near the window, watching her work with a kind of quiet fascination. The way she lifted the kettle, poured with careful precision, set the cups down without clatter, it all spoke of someone who had lived long enough to turn the ordinary into something artful. When she finally joined me, sliding the cup across the table, her fingers brushed mine for the briefest second. A tiny jolt ran up my arm, and I had to look down quickly, hiding the way my chest tightened. "You're my brother's neighbor, right?" she asked, her lips curving into a half-smile. "Yes," I said, my voice a little softer than I intended. I live just across the fence." Her smile deepened, not playful, not mocking, just knowing. Like she understood more than I was saying. As I lifted the cup, the steam curled upward, carrying the scent of chamomile. She rested her chin lightly against her hand, studying me in a way that felt unhurried yet attentive. And I realized in that moment that this wasn't just a polite encounter. It was the start of something I couldn't name yet, a quiet shift in the air, as if the sunlight itself had leaned closer to listen. The tea had grown cooler between us, but neither of us seemed in a rush to finish it. She asked me about my work, my studies, what brought me to this part of town. Her questions were simple, but the way she listened made them feel heavier, as though each answer mattered more than I realized. "I do a little freelance work, mostly online," I said, tracing the rim of the cup with my thumb. Her eyes stayed on me, steady, calm, but not cold. "That must give you a lot of freedom." I shrugged. "Some. But freedom can feel empty if you don't know where you're going." Her lips pressed into a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. For a moment, I thought she might say something about herself, but instead she tilted her head and asked, "And what do you do with that freedom?" I almost laughed at the question, because the truth was, I didn't have an answer. But before I could stumble over words, the silence stretched between us, thicker than the tea-scented air. The only sounds were the faint ticking of the clock above the stove and the distant hum of traffic outside. It wasn't uncomfortable silence, not exactly. It was charged, like the pause before rain. She reached for her cup at the same time I did, and our fingers brushed once again. Neither of us pulled away quickly. My pulse jumped, loud in my ears, and I could see a flicker in her gaze, something caught between curiosity and restraint. "You must think I'm prying," she said softly, setting her cup down. "No," I said quickly, maybe too quickly. I don't mind." Her expression softened, as if the honesty in my voice disarmed her. She leaned back slightly, folding her arms, but her eyes stayed on mine. There was something about the way she held my gaze, unflinching, that made me both restless and drawn in. The sunlight outside shifted, dimming slightly as clouds passed. The room seemed to fold into that stillness, wrapping us in a quiet that was less about absence of sound and more about everything unspoken. I found myself studying the way a strand of hair had slipped from behind her ear, catching in the light. My throat felt dry, though I hadn't even sipped the tea again. We were just two people making small talk. And yet, the silence between each question and answer carried a weight I couldn't ignore, like we were standing on the edge of something neither of us dared name. The sky outside had shifted to that quiet in-between, the moment where dusk lingers but night hasn't fully claimed the world. She moved toward the window, almost unconsciously, her fingertips grazing the curtain as if she were deciding whether to close it. I followed her glance and saw the faint orange glow of the setting sun catching on the rooftops. "You ever notice," she said, her voice softer now, "how evenings feel louder than mornings? Not because of noise, but because of what they carry." I tilted my head. "What do you mean?" She exhaled, a breath that seemed heavier than the words that followed. "Evenings remind you of what you didn't do. What you're still waiting for. They're quieter, but they press harder on the heart." There was no teasing in her tone. No attempt to sound poetic. She was just, honest. And that honesty pressed into me in a way that felt almost intimate. I stepped closer to the window, though not too close. Just near enough to feel that invisible pull between us. "I think I understand," I murmured. "Mornings are full of plans. Evenings are full of questions." Her eyes flicked toward me, sharp for a second, then softened again. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, her hand lingering there longer than necessary. It was a small gesture, but one that exposed something, an edge of vulnerability she usually kept hidden. She leaned against the window frame, her shoulder brushing the curtain. "Life didn't turn out the way I thought it would. I don't regret most of it. But sometimes the quiet gets to me." I wanted to say something reassuring, but I knew better than to fill the air with empty comfort. Instead, I let the silence hold us. The light between us dimmed as the sun slipped lower, casting a pale lavender hue across the room. My knee brushed hers when I leaned on the windowsill, not on purpose but not entirely accidental either. The touch was so slight it could have been ignored, but it wasn't. My chest tightened with the awareness of it, and I sensed she felt it too, though she didn't move away. Her perfume lingered faintly in the air, delicate, grounding. She glanced at me once more, and in her eyes I caught something rare, a moment of trust. Not a smile, not a confession. Just an openness, as if she had allowed me to see the fragile edges of her strength. And in that fragile edge, I felt something shift quietly inside me. By the time I rose to leave, the evening had settled fully. The house felt too quiet after her confession, as though the walls themselves had absorbed every word. She offered to walk me out, and when I stepped onto the porch, the air was cooler than I expected. A thin breeze brushed against my skin, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and cut grass. "Do you mind if I join you for a short walk?" she asked, almost casually. But I could hear the edge of hesitation beneath her words, like she wasn't sure whether I'd welcome her company or not. "Of course," I said quickly, too quickly. She gave me that half-smile again, the kind that revealed little but lingered long after. We started down the street, our footsteps falling into rhythm on the pavement. The neighborhood was hushed, with only the hum of distant traffic and the occasional flicker of porch lights breaking the quiet. Street lamps stood at even intervals, each one casting a pool of yellow light that we passed through like slow-moving shadows. She asked about my family, about the little details of my life that no one usually cared to ask. I answered honestly, even when the words felt small. And then, in between questions, there was silence again. Not awkward this time, but dense, as if the quiet itself was watching us. When she laughed at something I said, a clumsy attempt at humor, the sound was soft, unguarded. For a moment, she looked younger, freer, like the weight of years had slipped from her shoulders. I couldn't help but stare, memorizing the way the lamplight framed her face. Our arms brushed once, the fabric of her sleeve whispering against mine. It happened again a few steps later. Neither of us pulled away. My hands stayed shoved in my pockets, though every part of me wanted to reach for hers. She slowed her pace near the corner, tilting her head back to look at the sky. "It's funny," she said, her voice low. "I used to take walks like this all the time. Back then, it felt like I had the whole world ahead of me. Now," she let the thought fade, her eyes fixed on the stars. I looked at her profile, at the quiet strength in her features, and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just attraction anymore. It was the beginning of understanding, of seeing her not as my neighbor's sister, but as a woman who carried both grace and weight, laughter and longing, all in the same breath. And as we walked on, side by side beneath the dim glow of the streetlights, I knew something had changed between us, though neither of us dared to name it. By the time we circled back toward her house, the night had deepened. Porch lights glowed like watchful eyes along the street, and the faint hum of crickets filled the silence that stretched between us. Neither of us seemed ready for the walk to end, but there it was, the familiar outline of her front gate, the glow of her porch light spilling across the path like a soft invitation. She slowed first, her steps drawing to a reluctant pause at the doorstep. I followed, standing close enough to notice the way the cool air carried a strand of her hair across her cheek. She brushed it back, her hand lingering near her face as though buying herself time. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She placed her keys into the lock, but her hand trembled slightly, the metal slipping before it caught. The sound was small, but it made my chest tighten, because she wasn't a woman who fumbled often. I reached out without thinking. "Here, let me," our fingers collided on the cold metal. Her skin was warm against mine, startling in its softness. The contact lasted only a second, but the effect was instant, my breath caught, and I knew hers did too. She let me take the keys, though she didn't move back. I slid the key into the lock, the motion clumsy under the weight of the silence between us. When the door clicked open, I handed the keys back. She didn't take them right away. Instead, her gaze met mine, steady, searching, as if looking for something she wasn't ready to admit aloud. "You're too young to understand," she whispered finally, her voice barely more than the night air itself. The words should have ended things. Should have built the wall higher. But they didn't. Because her tone didn't sound certain, it sounded conflicted, fragile, as though she was trying to convince herself more than me. I wanted to say something, anything that would bridge the space between us, but my throat felt dry. My hand still hovered near hers, and I noticed the faint tremor in her fingers. She wasn't as composed as she wanted me to believe. "You might be right," I said softly, forcing my voice past the tightness in my chest. "But that doesn't mean I don't feel it." Her lips parted slightly, as if to argue, but no words came. Instead, she exhaled a slow breath, and for that fleeting moment, I could see the struggle in her eyes, the push and pull between restraint and surrender. The porch light buzzed faintly above us, the air thick with everything unspoken. We stood so close I could feel the warmth radiating from her, the quiet rhythm of her breathing syncing with mine. And though nothing more happened, no kiss, no confession, the pause itself felt louder than any declaration. It was an almost touch. An almost truth. And it left me trembling with the sense that we had both stepped onto something fragile, something neither of us knew how to undo. The door stood open behind her, a slice of warm light spilling across the porch, but she didn't step inside. She lingered there instead, holding the keys loosely in her hand, as if entering the house would mean shutting the moment down. Her eyes flicked to mine again, and for the first time that evening, she didn't look away. The porch light framed her features, softening them, but the intensity in her gaze was impossible to miss. "I shouldn't be standing here with you like this," she said quietly. The words were firm, but her voice carried no conviction, only weariness, as though she had been repeating the same line to herself for too long. I swallowed, my chest tightening. "Then why are you?" That question hung between us, fragile but unignorable. She drew in a breath, as if steadying herself against it. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, a smile curved at the corners of her mouth. It wasn't playful. It wasn't careless. It was the kind of smile people give when they're about to cross a line they swore they never would. Her eyes softened, though I could see the shimmer of conflict in them. Because, her voice trailed, then returned in a near whisper. Because I don't want you to see me as older. I want you to see me as yours. The word struck harder than any touch. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to still, the hum of the porch light, the crickets in the yard, even the air in my lungs. I searched her face, half expecting to find regret there, some sign that she hadn't meant it. But there was none. Only the steady glow of a woman finally saying aloud what she had tried to bury. I didn't move closer. I didn't dare. All I did was let the words sink in, let them echo inside me until they felt carved into the night itself. She shifted slightly, almost as if embarrassed by her own honesty, but she didn't take it back. That soft, fragile smile stayed, and with it came the quiet acknowledgement that something between us had changed forever. My heart hammered in my chest, but I kept my voice low, careful, reverent. That's all I've seen from the start. Her breath caught, and for a moment, her composure cracked. Not in weakness, but in the way someone finally lets down a wall they've held up for years. The silence that followed was no longer heavy with hesitation. It was full of everything we hadn't dared to say until now. For a long moment, we simply stood there on the porch, her words still circling the night air, soft but unshakable, "Call me yours." She turned slightly, her hand brushing against the doorframe, but she didn't move to go inside. Instead, she exhaled, as though the confession had both lightened her and left her unsteady. I could see it in the way her shoulders eased, but her gaze lingered, searching mine for reassurance she had done the right thing. I stepped closer, not closing the distance too quickly, just enough so she could feel my presence without needing to ask for it. My hand rose, hesitant at first, before settling lightly against her back. The warmth of her body beneath the thin fabric of her blouse spread through my palm, grounding me. She let her head tilt toward me, her cheek brushing the edge of my shoulder. It was a small movement, almost imperceptible, but it carried the weight of trust. The night wrapped around us, the air cool, the glow of the porch light casting us in a fragile circle of intimacy. Neither of us spoke. There was no need. Words had done enough. Her hand found its way to my arm, resting there with the faintest pressure. It wasn't a grasp, not a plea, just a presence, quiet and steady. The kind of touch that said, "I'm here, and I don't want this moment to end." I closed my eyes briefly, letting the stillness sink in. I could hear the rhythm of her breathing, feel the way her body leaned ever so slightly into mine. It wasn't passion, not yet. It was something deeper. The slow recognition that two lives, separated by years and expectations, had stumbled into a space neither had been looking for, but both needed. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes met mine, calm and steady. There was no fear left in them, no hesitation. Just acceptance. "You should go," she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. "I know," I replied, though I made no move to step away. Her lips curved into a faint smile, soft, tender, unguarded. And in that smile, I saw the truth: she wasn't asking me to leave. She was asking me to understand that whatever this was, it had already begun. So I stayed a moment longer, letting the silence hold us both, until the world beyond the porch felt like it could wait. The night closed around us, not with questions, but with a quiet answer neither of us had dared to imagine until now.